Thank you, Bill, for those comments, and yes, thank those other people that helped you. Our last inductee is Jay Reed. Our presentations will be by three good friends of Jay. First, we'll have Christine Thomas, who's the Dean of the College of Natural Resources here at the university. It was from Christine that I first heard about this fabulous book that I had a chance to read the last couple months. So we'll hear quite a bit about a book called Thor and More. Secondly, we will have George Stanley, the managing editor and I believe vice president of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, who worked closely with Jay for many years. And then lastly, we'll hear from James Addis, who's a retired administrator from the Division of Resource Management at the DNR. So, Christine, please take over.
Okay, good afternoon. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Jay Reed on the occasion of his induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. And before I get there, congratulations, Mr. Germain and Bill. You're one of the first people that Dan Trainer introduced me to when I went to work for him. And one of the things we didn't hear today is Bill was a big supporter of the College of Natural Resources through the years. I can't even tell you how many times he was a guest speaker in my and other classes, sharing his expertise with the future resource managers in the world, so congratulations. Before we get too far down the road, I'd like to thank Mike Bino for putting together his book because it made this task much easier. Jim Addis, Kathleen Falk, and Herb Benke for helping support the nomination. Herb himself, a Hall of Famer, would love to have been here today, and this is one of the first times that Herb hasn't been here for this event. In addition, I'd like to thank Steve Menzel and Christine Reed and Stacy Ellen Bannock for helping put this together. We started this in February, and especially my colleague Stacy. We've been full partners in the creative effort here, and I have to tell you, this project was the most fun thing that I did this year. And also, thanks to Christine Reed, who supported Jay for 3 decades in his conservation work. Okay. So this is going to sound sort of familiar. Jay began life the way many kids in Wisconsin began life in the 1920s. He started out as a country boy. He was born in Nelson on the banks of the Mississippi River in 1928. Jay's father died when he was 4, so Jay grew up in a fatherless family during the Depression. He was close with his mother, older sister, and especially his brother, Huck. And like many families during this time, the meat, fur, and fish that came from the land was important to the survival of the family. Living on the land and with it shaped who Jay Reed would become. Jay went to school in Nelson, but was never that keen on academics. And at the age of 15, he lied about his age, joined the Marine Corps, and went to the South Pacific. And while the war was drawing to a close, Jay did see action in the invasion of the Coral Atolls. And when the war was over, Jay, like many young men, returned, unable to settle back into the old patterns. He had left a boy, and he came back a man. Jay moved to Rockford, Illinois, and worked in a foundry and at a hotel at night tending bar. And along the way, he landed a job writing for the local newspaper, the Rockford Register-Star. He started out sweeping the floor and doing other menial tasks, and as happens in life, sometimes we get to take an unexpected path. Jay got a chance to write an article, this really slays me, about a women's golf tournament. And that story won an award, and Jay was off and writing. And during the early 50s, Jay went back to war in Korea. And when he finally got a chance to return to civilian life, he landed a job at the Appleton Post-Crescent as a police reporter. He covered government meetings also, and eventually he got a chance to write some outdoor stories. And then in 1963, Jay was recruited to write for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel as an outdoor writer, and the rest is conservation history. And I'd also like to tell you that Jay's a person who was followed around for 40 years by professional photographers, and Stacy and I have never had the pleasure of working with such great material for a presentation that we put together because of all those professional photographs. So the rest was conservation history. Well, almost all the rest, because in the late 60s, the Journal sent Jay to Vietnam to cover the war. He wrote a series of articles that were highly recognized in that Jay became a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. And in fact, Jay was twice a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. But the Jay that we knew and loved was mostly focused over 4 decades on enjoying the outdoors and bringing that enjoyment to us vicariously through his articles in the Journal every week. Thus, Jay's role, and the reason he's being inducted into the Hall of Fame today, is a little different than the other Hall of Famers, many of whom he knew. Interestingly, in 2000, Tim Isley published an article in the Wisconsin Outdoor Journal, which now doesn't exist, on the 20 most influential conservationists in the 20th century, and with great prediction accuracy, Jay was on that list. This is my honor today. This is the 4th induction talk that I've had the pleasure to give over the history of the Hall of Fame. One of those, of course, was Dan Trainer. And Jay knew some of the folks that were inducted into the Conservation Hall of Fame, probably knew a lot of them, and Dan would have been one that he knew. One of the things that Jay did was help the rest of us do our work. And he helped people like Dan Trainer, who worked with folks in and out of academia to build a world-class natural resources management college in Wisconsin. He didn't know Wilhelmina Labuddy, who crusaded for a myriad of conservation issues at a time when the concept of conservation was really beginning to flourish, but if he had have known her, he would have helped her. He helped people like Herb Benke, who brought practicality and common sense to policy making. Jay helped them do their work because Jay was the entree to the hearts and minds of hundreds of thousands of outdoor Wisconsinites every week, and I have a couple of personal stories. When I finished my PhD and went back to full-time teaching, I was asked by the then chair of the Natural Resources Board to be involved in a statewide panel to look at ethics in outdoor activities and use of outdoor equipment. And that year-long panel wrote a report. But the first day that the panel was announced, Jay wrote a story, and many of you may remember he had a voice. The voice was Jack Pine Joe that showed up in many of his stories. And he told Jack Pine about this Ethics and Fair Chase Study Committee. And Jack Pine's response to the Ethics and Fair Chase Study Committee was that he would give up his tree stand when they peeled his cold dead toes from off of it. And then later, when I was launching the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, and Alan Haney loaned me $150 to print and mail the brochures, and nobody registered for Becoming an Outdoors Woman, and I began to wonder how was I going to pay Alan back. Jay Reed wrote an article in the Sunday Journal-Sentinel about the program, and the phone didn't stop ringing. It took 3 people to keep up with the phone calls on the Monday after the Sunday, and the workshop filled that day. And so, in a way, Jay Reed probably saved becoming an outdoorswoman from being something that never happened. And I got to pay back the $150. So that was the power of the pen when in Jay's hand. However, besides making life easier for the rest of us to do our work, Jay had work of his own. He got to spend 40 years living the dream. He hunted, and you relived a similar hunt. He fished, and you felt the tug on the line, and you felt the thrill of that miracle of the aquatic world breaking water. He enjoyed the camaraderie of friends, just like we all do. He traveled to exotic outdoor locations, and we dreamed of our next wilderness experience. He ate fish and game in the grand style, and we all remembered that fish and game, or any food at all outdoors with friends, is the grandest style of all. He spent time on the water, in the woods and on the trails of the four corners of our state. He took us with him every week, and we experienced the excitement of a new season and the grandeur of our beautiful state through Jay's wonderful way with words. He wrote, and we dreamed of our next adventure. And then there was Thor. We met him as a puppy. We followed his growth and training. We followed his adventures and misadventures. And every one of us who ever raised a hunting dog and reveled in the first flush or point and marveled at the first retrieve, we were there with Jay every step of the way. We experienced those proud moments. We knew the joy of companionship. We understood the deep satisfaction of the partnership. And as every old bird hunter knows, there comes a day when your partner has the will to hunt, but not the wherewithal. And we cried with Jay on that day. And here at the last, I may have gotten a little personal, but I think that's the real point. I never got to hunt with Jay Reed. But every week for 4 decades, he took millions of us to the field with him. He entertained us, he taught us, he inspired us, and he kept the flame alive. It was personal for everyone that read his column, and that is the real gift of a talented writer. And that was a great service to the world of conservation. And that is why he's being honored here today with the greatest recognition that Wisconsin has to offer its conservationists. Thank you, Jay Reed, and thank you, Hall of Fame, for recognizing this life of service. Thank you. This is George Stanley, who probably knew Jay's professional self better than anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. That was a wonderful tribute to our friend. Jay Reed was a good friend. And I'd like to thank Joe Passano and the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame for honoring him and for inviting me to say a few words in his memory. And Joe, you mentioned earlier how you have to get outdoors to develop a conservation ethic. And I think that's very true, and that's what Jay was all about. That's what I'm going to talk about today. I'd also like to thank Jay's widow, Christine Reed, for the honor of being with you here today. The Journal-Sentinel takes great pride in its legacy of great outdoor writers and conservationists. Gordon McQuarrie, my friends and colleagues, Don Johnson, Bob Riepenhoff, Paul Smith. But spanning across the generations of scribblers for nearly 40 years was Jay Reed. Jay did not have a journalism degree or a college degree. He lied about his age while still a 15-year-old boy to go and fight with the Marines in the Pacific. His education, his inspiration, was the natural world, and he wrote about it like nobody else. He wrote about it as if he were a part of it himself, not an occasional visitor, not a distant observer. It seemed like his words grew in the trees until a cold north wind blew them right onto our pages. And I'm going to read a little bit of that, because this is Jay Reed. It was a day that was really two if you count the night before, and you should, because that's when it really started. There was wind and there was rain the day before, but nothing really unusual for mid-October. But by late afternoon, every child of the swamp knew something was afoot. It started when the wind picked up enough to bend the trees and kick the clouds across the sky. The rain, which had been sweetly warm, turned suddenly cold, and the drops thickened. The air developed a cutting edge. Clothing, already wet with sweat and day-long rain, became chilled bandages for bodies beginning to rebel against the dropping temperatures. You could sense something evil in it all, and so could the birds, because there came about some movement in the sky. And when the hunter downed the mallard to fill his bag limit, he noted the swiftness of his dog in making the retrieve. The message clearly was to hurry and get out of there. Then came the night when it all really began. Safe in the cabin, with the heat turned on to dry wet clothing and boots, the man and the dog listened to the wind drive sheets of rain against the walls and windows. It was coming straight out of the north, and the drops made zinging, pinging sounds as they ricocheted into the depth of the night. Somewhere, sometime during the small hours, it had stopped, because the first thing the man heard when he woke up at 4:30 a.m. was a silence. He put the dog out first, and then he heated coffee water. Then he checked his boots to see if they were dry, and they were. When he let the dog back inside and reached down to stroke the animal's ears, he realized what had happened. It had turned cold overnight, really cold. The animal's coat was frigid to the touch. He stepped outside the cabin, and the grass crunched underfoot. It was frozen solid. The rain puddles, too, were sheets of glassy ice. And in the light streaming from the cabin window, he saw spits of snow as they glistened in the yellow shaft and then disappeared. The chill was all the way through him, and he went back inside to the warmth of the cabin and steaming coffee. He dressed that day for winter. It was the first time for long underwear and 2 pairs of pants and an extra shirt. It was the first time for gloves, the first time for 3 pairs of socks. By the time man and dog left the cabin, the wind was blowing once again. When they had reached the hunting grounds, it was whistling a small gale right out of the northwest. It was still midnight black when they made their way down the sharp incline off the road, but the sky was beginning to turn a shade lighter. They broke ice right away, a strange sensation for the young dog who'd never had to do that before. And they broke ice all the way down to their shooting blind, across the beaver flowages, around the potholes. The marsh grass was brittle with ice, and there was wind, always the wind. It was howling, sharp as a knife blade. It bent the willows and swayed the big elms. It ripped the leaves from the birches and sent them swirling across the lightning sky. When the man and dog reached their blind, it was 10 minutes before shooting time. Particles of ice clung to the underside of the dog. At first, the man could feel the heat working up from the walk into the swamp. The beginnings of sweat ran down the middle of his back, but that soon changed to a growing chill that seemed to reach all the way through him. He turned away from the wind and huddled with the dog behind the protecting ring of grass and willows, and there they waited for the hunting day to begin. As soon as it was light enough to see and shoot, the man knew this day would be different from all the rest. The storm had brought winter for sure, but it also brought ducks. The birds were moving everywhere, it seemed. At first, none within his range, but he could see them around the perimeter of the lake. And then the 2 mallards came from out of nowhere, and he followed the flight of one, and when the shotgun bellowed, the bird crumpled and fell across the water into a swatch of marsh grass. Now the dog had to break ice once again, for it ringed the edge of the little lake, and he did so, tentatively at first, and then with more confidence until he reached open water. He disappeared into the marsh grass, and then in moments reappeared with the mallard firmly in his grasp. It was a picture retrieved, and the man glowed with pride. The man shot a limit of ducks, greenhead mallards all, that day in the wind and the cold and the ice. The work of the dog was without fault. The man had shot well. It was the kind of day duck hunters dream about, but it was more than that. Back at the cabin that night, the ducks cleaned and a steak on the stove, with the dry socks and whiskey warm, the man decided that when you put it all together, the ducks, the dog work, the shooting, the weather, it was the best day of duck hunting he'd ever had. And that's something. And that is something. That's how my friend Jay Reed practiced conservation. By living the life of a great sportsman, by sharing with so many his fundamental love for wild places and things, for lakes, streams, and rivers, for brook trout, woodcock, and ruffed grouse, for noble deer and not ignoble deer camps, for potholes, ponds, marshes, and swamps. In Jay's stories, you felt the damp, smelt the mud, tasted the body and the blood. He stirred our memories and stoked our love for these places and experiences. He inspired us to value them, and that is something. Thank you. Next up will be our friend Jim Addis, a career wildlife manager for the DNR who retired as Division of Resource Management.
Wait for better weather.
It gets you all teary-eyed and call you up here, so. I'll be brief. Now, I don't want the DNR employees to laugh about that. Jay was my friend. He was a hunting partner. It was an unusual relationship because in most cases, the press and a bureaucrat don't mix very well. Husband said, he used to say, don't get in arguments with people that buy their ink in train loads. But Jay was unique in that we sort of had a pact to start with, that we would keep our business and our private life apart. And that came about after many years of contact. I first saw him at a Great Lakes Fisheries Commission meeting. He was sitting there on the gallery with a bunch of the papers, scribbling in his reporter's pad and leafing through things. And I asked one of the people who he was, and he said it was Jay Reed, a reporter from the Journal. Later that night, he was talking with people at the meeting and various things. And over the years, we got to begin to interact because I was in a position where I had to be his source, but he probably realized he was our source too. Both of our bosses, I suspect, told us don't get too close to each other. I know that mine said be careful, you know, they got a different role to play. But I think the relationship that we developed helped us do a better job of both of our jobs. When Joe would write a Jack Pine Joe story, I could tell what the feedback was going to be. If we had a proposal out and Jack Pine Joe didn't like it, we had a problem. If he said something favorably, we had an easier route to pass. Wherever we went in the state, we would see people come up to Joe or up to Jay and try to explain to him how they felt and how they proceeded things. And always somehow he condensed that to explain things. He also had a network of fish and wildlife managers and wardens and technicians. And in that network, he got our side of the story, and somehow, when he agreed with it, or when he understood it to where he liked it, he would write a report. He would report it as he saw it. And in those reports, it helped us immensely. The toughest time for Jay and I was during the treaty negotiations, because I had to be secret. I couldn't tell anybody some of the things that we were doing, and he still expected a relationship. And I never will forget that we went from people saying he's trying to promote you to people saying he was attacking me. My point is that when we work with the press, and when the press works with us, it's a joint trust. And that joint trust, Jay understood better than any reporter I ever knew. He felt our pain as bureaucrats, and he felt the pain of the public, and he felt the joy on both sides. I think that I'm going to be finish this up mainly because I think everybody's getting hungry. But I think that someone needs to explore that aspect of Jay's life, his writing, his hunting and fishing, but his ability to see how to connect the hunter and the regulator and the public was remarkable. I'm going to take a privilege, since he isn't here. Christine, he adored you. And you were an immense part of his life. And thank you for that. Before I get to bawling here, I'll say it. The Hall of Fame is an impressive group. I've been to many of these experiences, and every inductee has a special role to play. Today's inductees are special to me. I've known Cliff and respected him. I've known Bill Horvath from a distance most of the time and respected him. This is something that needs to continue and needs to go forward. Thank you, Board of Governors and the directors, for doing the work that you do year after year. Thanks.
Thank you for those sentimental and very valued comments from three very different perspectives. Oftentimes I find it strange that we can have a reason for it here when we talk about conservation, but these are very important emotional times in the lives of many of us. Just maybe a quick comment about that. The book, Thor and More, maybe Christine will say a few things, but the reading by George was, I think, really excellent. I've often thought that, and maybe, I don't know, did Jay ever write a full novel in a sense, or a full story that kind of builds that whole life, or mostly essays?
Yeah, these were actually all stories that appeared in the paper, including his Vietnam one, too.
Anyway, one reason I bring it up is, having read this, most of it just a few weeks ago, there was one essay that brought tears to my eyes in a way. There's an essay in here about the old shotgun, and I think I saw pictures of it for the first time today. Is that right, Chris? And it made me go down and pull out a shotgun that I inherited from my father and his father and his father, and recognizing that guns have a way to tie us together to the outdoors and to the things that we love in the outdoors. With that, I'd like Katrina again to come forward and read the legislative tribute. And I think part of what I was going to say is I encourage you to take a look at the book that Jay and Christine have put together.
It's my privilege to present this legislative citation. Know you by these presents. Whereas Jay Reed was the premier outdoor writer in Wisconsin for many years, publishing thousands of articles on hunting, fishing, environmental issues, and natural resources management in the state's largest newspaper, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And whereas Jay was born in Nelson, Wisconsin in 1928 and was an avid outdoorsman from the time he was in grade school. And whereas at the age of 17, Jay enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, I think it was supposed to be 15, and participated in the invasion of the Pacific Islands during World War II and served on active duty during the Korean War. And whereas Jay joined the Appleton Post-Crescent following his military career and was recruited as an outdoors writer by the Milwaukee Journal in 1963. And whereas from 1967 to 1968, Jay accompanied combat units in Vietnam as a journalist. And upon returning to the Milwaukee Journal, he wrote outdoors and natural resource columns for a total of 39 years. And whereas Jay's writing revealed an ardent conservationist, and over the years his columns covered issues relating to hunting and fishing, commercial fishing, parks, endangered resources, treaty rights, and many other environmental topics. And whereas Jay's contributions clearly influenced natural resources policy, as his opinions and ideas influenced readers statewide, and his feedback was frequently sought by governors, natural resource board members, Department of Natural Resources secretaries, and legislators. And whereas Jay played the role of mediator and interpreter on behalf of hunters, anglers, and outdoor enthusiasts, and he clearly articulated the goals, concerns, and aspirations of millions of Wisconsin citizens. And whereas Jay assembled over 100 of his best-loved columns for publication, and his widow, Christine, completed the project in 2009 under the title Thor and More. And whereas Jay's influence as a journalist positively impacted decision-making involving natural resource policy and conservation, and his book and columns remain examples of how journalism can help shape public opinion through an informed citizenry. And whereas Jay Reed is a 2014 inductee to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, now therefore Senator Julie Lassa and Representative Katrina Shanklin do hereby honor Jay Reed for his lifelong efforts to inspire greater appreciation and stewardship of Wisconsin's natural resources, and his leadership as a journalist and conservationist who used the power of the pen to encourage generations of Wisconsinites to preserve our proud outdoor heritage and unique wild places. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite Christine Reed forward and to help us unveil the plaque and to say a few words on behalf of Jay.
Hello, I'm Christine. I'm the one who was usually introduced after Thor. You know what you do. Got to the point where people would ask, how's Thor, before they said hello to Jay too, so he did it. I'm honored to be here today on behalf of my husband, and very honored to be in the presence of the other inductees and their remarkable accomplishments. And Christine and George and Jim really gave you pretty well-rounded idea of Jay as a person and what his goals were. And there's not really much more that I could say, but I think we live in a wonderful state as long as we have people like all of these inductees and some journalists and other people covering it all. Will remain a strong state with a good conservation legacy. And I thank all of you for being here with us today. Thank you.